Howdy folks, it is Monday, November 7th, 2011. This is the Bad Dog Book Club. I believe it's episode 19B, believe it or not.
Oh my goodness.
And I am Skip Ruddertail, your otter editor, and with me, as is often the case...
Yep. Well, we only ended up doing, 2 shows apart or something like that? Yeah. I'm Toonses, by the way. Yeah. It's not my real name.
Wow, that's quite an introduction there. So yes, that's Toonses, the writing cat.
Yeah, Toonses, the whatever cat, the adjectiving cat.
The adjectiving cat. It's disgusting.
Or the verbing cat.
That's really disgusting. If it was adverbing, we'd be sickened and have to shut it off. So. All right.
I'm not even thinking.
Yeah. So this week's story is the Onerous one by Vixyy Fox, as read by Vixyy. So, it's exciting. I said in my little intro last week, or I guess a week and a half ago, that I was excited about this story because finally, after 18 episodes, we have a female author and a female reader.
Now, just real quick before we get any further, let's assign blame. Who's at fault for this?
Female authors and readers for not sending us things.
Okay, you want to deflect blame. It's clearly my fault. Clearly my fault, I think, and your fault.
Ah.
Because we should have sought out some female authors earlier.
I'd said things, but yes, I was very happy.
I just completely disregarded the whole, matter. And now that I realize it's 19 episodes, and I just feel embarrassed.
Yes, exactly. Me too.
And I'm blaming you, because you embarrassed me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Skip.
So here we are, both of us, embarrassed. Toonses
aghast.
Bright red like a lobster. Filled with shame. If this was an anime, the blood would be pouring out his nose.
It may as well be.
It may as well. It is. You can't... Those of you watching the video feed, we apologize. It's very graphic.
Would it be too mean to use the term weeaboo with this story?
How do you mean?
I don't know. Maybe that's just my gut reaction because I tend to find Asian literature from a North American point of view. It seems, I don't know, it just doesn't intrigue me very much. Unless that term they always use, weeaboos for the Americans that get obsessed with Japanese history.
I thought it was otaku.
Otaku. I think weeaboo is the mean version. Weeaboo is the mean version, which I personally, as a bully...
I'm sure we'll get a million, hardcore anime people, writing in this week, oh my god, you guys are so wrong. It's actually... And then we'll be corrected. So feel free to correct us.
But what is the nationality of the writer? Is the writer American?
I don't know.
See, we finally figured out the woman problem.
I can't find a FA page for Vixyy Fox. This is Vixyy with 2 X's. But she is in the Furry Writers Guild. So you can look for her stuff there.
Alright. The Furry Writers Union?
Yeah.
Do we have an actual writers union?
The guild.
I think we need something more like a union, that is necessarily jacking up the charges for commissions.
Well, the guild, you can only be in it if you've been published.
That's just the least.
In at least 2 paying publications, I believe.
See, now that's just another example of these white-collar unions that come in and exclude the actual, real laborers. I mean, geez, you have to get published?
No.
I haven't...
In print.
In print. That's...
Yeah, an actual hold-it-in-my-hand
That's
copy.
ridiculous, though, because how much of the actual furry stuff that you read is in print?
Once Fang comes out, you just need one more, and then you can be an elitist snob, too.
No, I'm just saying, how much of the actual furry stuff that you read is in print?
I know.
It's all digital, right?
Without getting into a discussion in too much depth, I agree with you.
Yay.
I agree. Feel free to check her out there. But no, I don't know what country she lives in. This story was picked out for us. By Andrew White Fox over at Rabbit Valley, because one thing I've in addition to giving a shout out to you authors who are listening in and saying send us stuff, I've also said to some publishers, hey, if you've got a collection that's coming out, send us a story from it. And we're happy to get the word out. So that's, we got one of Red Chan's stories out, and that's coming out soon. And this is from a collection published by Rabbit Valley. as well. So
move that product.
Move that product, yeah. Because we're all in this together, guys. You know, it's too small. The free writing community is too small to be stabbing each other in the back or
just saying,
bisecting each other in half. Yeah, spend the money. So,
Patreon.
So yeah, I hadn't. You know, I let Andrew pick the story out. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I don't think it was my favorite this season.
It was.
But I had a good time with it.
Well, I was trying to get into the action mood. I just thought that the only issue was that it was so cut up. Like, this one battle is being expressed throughout, like, the beginning of the story, through the different parts of the middle of the story, then finally the climax of the story. And I just felt like, as, like, an action scene, it might have been better to maybe have a series of confrontations or something like that.
Well, here's what I'd ask you then is, have you watched a lot of kung fu movies or read stories or even, like, talking, like, Bruce Lee stuff or some of the Japanese ones? Or even, like, more recent kind of works that are half homages, like Kill Bill.
Yeah, I've seen a few of those, whatever. Like, usually in parties, like, people, like, put on a kung fu movie, and I don't know if I remember what it was called, but, I mean, I like watching the fight scenes. Here's the thing is, I understand I'm approaching this from a person who is not necessarily maybe this is being written for. Right. Because I'm a bit ignorant to it. Mm-hmm. And I like fight scenes, I like things like that, and that's what I wanted to be appealed to, is I'm, like, my interest in violence.
And there is violence here, but I guess what I was trying to get at is, you said one of the problems is kind of maybe the flow or the temporal aspect of the story. You're not wild about?
Oh, I'm sure you loved it, though, right?
I don't know. Well, I want to give my take on it anyway. Which is, this is a common trope in these kung fu movies. And I'm going to use one that I assume most of our listeners had seen because it was a pretty popular movie, and it's probably my favorite Tarantino film, Kill Bill.
No, I've seen it.
And you remember in Kill... So remember in the second part, she gets buried alive in the box. In the coffin.
That was the first part.
I think it's the second part. Pretty sure.
It's one of them. It's one movie, technically, right?
It is one movie, yes.
I've seen both parts.
So in Kill Bill...
1
or 2... she gets buried alive in the coffin. And she, sits there and, like, freaks out. And then we get a flashback to when she was being trained in martial arts by the wise old master.
Right.
And we learn the story of, practicing and including the thing where she's supposed to break a board with no... space, and then, because he has to, and then it ends up with her using this, cuts back to using her with the same technique to, free herself from the coffin. And this is, and what Tarantino's doing is straight homage to a lot of kung fu movies, where you cut back to how did, the movie starts off with our hero being a badass. Very often. Or our story here starts off with our hero being a badass. And then we cut back through flashbacks to how did our hero get to be a badass? Or sometimes, why did our hero start on the journey to be a badass? So, sometimes it'll be like what bad thing happened to them in their past to, like lead them to seek revenge or training or whatever. And so that's kind of what's going on here is this story of, so we're cutting back to see how did our hero get to be this way, and we even go to the kung fu stereotype of a specific instance in the past that directly translates to a specific instance in the present, which was hearing the birds.
Right.
So that's what I'm seeing. So that didn't bother me because I felt like it was a style of storytelling that I was familiar with, that I understood the lexicon.
I'm looking at you and the author have both had experience in these kinds of movies, though. So you're just educated in this model of storytelling.
Right. Though, if we are looking for parallels to kung fu stories, and I think we see a lot here. We have the wise master, who's old. We think Kill Bill, the guy with the beard.
Right.
And it is like a sort of revenge tale, and there's a magical weapon, a magical sword, and that's straight up
It's a magical sword?
if not, well, in this
I didn't
case
get the impression it was
is.
magical. They were just trying to imbue with some kind of mystical
Well, there's a
sense.
lady in the sword that talks to him, so I think that's magical.
You don't have to take that at face value.
You need batteries on some good
Do you
shrooms.
really?
Maybe that's what they're doing.
I don't know. Maybe when I read these, I just imagine a
value.
person having some kind of prescient psychotic fit.
No,
is that wrong?
No, it's not wrong because that's your interpretation, and
Bad.
it's informed by your own experience in reading other stories. So no, your interpretation is valid.
Okay, so I'm going to go on record. The sword's not talking to him, but there was a lady in the smoke, right?
I say the sword. That is the manifestation of the sword. Now, even if the sword isn't magical in a lot of these movies, it's a very important sword, and there are obviously Western motifs like this too. And we could look at Lord of the Rings, for instance. Where it's not a magical sword, but Bilbo's sword or Aragorn's sword is a very important sword or a special sword, which gives the user, to an extent, importance. Yeah.
Well, and then there's an awful lot of talk about like honor and respect and such lofty premises and in the story as well. I thought it was kind of funny, like in the last scene when Marcel, the Obby Chaw, is finally humiliated himself. He's described as like, his honor had poured out like urine from a pig or something like
that. Which is
like,
a great metaphor if you've ever seen a pig pee. I mean, I remember that, like, living in the village in Honduras.
We've all been to the 4-H fair, yes.
Oh,
I remember. Okay.
Yeah, and it's pretty graphic. So I thought that was a really nice image, actually. Because they just kind of let go. So, yeah, I thought that was...
very descriptive.
Descriptive.
I always want to see, like, a bad character who is portrayed in kind of gray lights, but you're not getting that here at all. Like, this guy is pretty much defined as being miserable. And almost like out of necessity. Because you don't really, like... It doesn't say so much about what his offenses were. It's just established that he's a bad dude.
And I think that's maybe the part of the story that if I feel there is a problem with story, that's my problem. Is that if we are looking at kind of a traditional, kung fu type story, well, let's take that argument for a moment, there needs to be, and if he's out to get this guy, we don't know why Tori is out to get this guy. We know that this guy's bad and he's a bandit and he kills people, but there's no personal reason for Tori to be going after him. And I think in a lot of kung, the main, the most traditional kung fu story would be that Marcel de Appy killed his master, Bonity, somehow.
Yeah, but no, his master
but that
died
doesn't
in some
happen.
enchanted moment.
Right.
Blading the sword shuffled him away.
Yeah, exactly. It was his time.
Oh, clearly.
Which I actually like that part. We can get to that in a second. But there isn't that classic kung fu story reason for revenge. And I think, why do you think... I'm trying to figure out, I don't know if you have an idea, but I'm trying to figure out why that isn't there.
So I got the impression that the main point of the story wasn't revenge, but trumpeting this sense of honor and dignity and the sense of steadfastness that is necessary for reaching this level of achievement and so on like that.
But is it honorable to kill this guy when he's done nothing personally to you?
I don't think that's really at question in the story. That's just what I feel the problem is it's when you don't give the bad character any kind of like gray area within which you can maybe empathize with them, you can't really consider this any other way but, this bad dude's getting killed. Whatever.
Well, there's no motivation for the bad guy.
You need some conflict
and
there
kind
to
of
near
in
the
a way
conflict
there's not a lot of
protagonist.
motivation for the good guy. Other than you get,
you get a motivation for the good guy because he's living on the memory of his master or something like that. I mean, it's a kind
or
of
is he
a
just
standard
like maybe
motivation.
He's like Sam in Quantum Leap, like he's just there to right wrongs, whatever they are.
Yeah.
But then you're right. Then we kind of have, and I can see that. So maybe he is just a, here is a bad person, and nobody else is stopping him, and I'm going to because nobody else is, and that's a valid reason I think for a story. But then, as you said, there's no kind of motivation for this bad guy. And
neither is there any conflict, because it seems portended from the beginning that the result of this fight is clear. I mean, Tori's gonna kill this dude, obviously. And I mean, I was willing
we assume anyway.
I was willing to assume that from the first, and I was willing to be upset in my assumption, but I clearly wasn't, was I? No. And I mean,
I do like how the story neatly bookends with itself. You know, starting with the perfect cut and ending with the perfect cut.
But I feel like you can have that. You can have this kind of preordained outcome sometimes, or people see it coming, but they want to at least be thrown into doubt at somewhere along the line. But when you have a character who is so thinly developed and so unmotivationally driven, it's kind of hard as a reader to imagine even just the writer just having any sort of regard for that character.
Do you think the story was too short for you?
That probably is it. I mean, it probably just could have used some nice fleshing out.
It's interesting. I think maybe... I guess that was my thing. You know, I'd feel like... Yeah, there needs to be something more about Marcel D'Ape, or some kind of relationship between the two, somehow. Because there isn't a relationship.
No, I don't know. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. And I would have been able to...
And I'm not meaning an unfun relationship, despite the nature of our show very often. I wasn't suggesting that.
I could have enjoyed just some very detailed and illustrative battle scenes. But I felt as if even the battle scenes themselves were dedicated to this philosophizing, if I'm not butchering that word, I forget, on the nature of battle and things like that. So it seems very
Which I kind of liked. I kind of
that's
liked
cool.
that.
I figured you would like that. I wanted to like hear about blades cutting things open and clashing against each other, and not. It read more like a game of chess than it read like a high action kung fu battle like you might see in a scene.
And I suppose maybe that's the difference between a Bruce Lee movie and a Kurosawa movie or something. You know, where you've got
it's like watching a kung fu movie where you can tell they just did not have much for the budget and the choreography.
Well, no. I won't say... What I'd say... I get what you're saying. And my reply would be that the pacing of the story is a non-Western pacing.
Doesn't mean you can't have battle.
A lot of... If you look at martial arts books or films... A lot of times, if you look at, say, Kurosawa, for instance, the pacing, in many ways, feels incredibly slow to us. And then yet at moments, I'm thinking of, like, Beat Takashi's Fireworks here, you've got, like, sublime beauty punctuated by brief interludes of extreme violence. You know, but most of the time, if, you know, the pond is still, and then, you know, you throw dynamite in, and then the pond's still again for most of the time. And I think this story kind of plays a little bit with that framework, where you have, you know, kind of a lot of these back scenes, and it moves kind of slowly, but then you have, and the moments of violence are spectacular but very brief, but maybe they weren't spectacular enough for you.
I don't know, I thought... Because the author clearly has like a talent for good imagery. I just would have wanted more of it. I mean, that's really about it. It kind of reminds me. Okay, so like they had the fasting in the story with the rice. I just would have wanted more rice. I was tired of fasting.
You're tired of fasting. I like that. That is maybe my favorite bit in the story.
Oh, he got the first scoop of rice. Good for him.
Yes. Well, that. You're so sarcastic.
I don't know. I just couldn't get into
the
conflict.
I really liked... that's my favorite line, is Tori knew he would forever remember this moment. 1 week without food, and now this first spoonful of rice. It was such an honor. That's what I don't know. I think that's the kind of essence of the story, and somehow... Yeah.
When he gets... It's the benediction from his master, essentially. So, of course, it's supposed to be, like, a pleasant scene.
Yeah. So, you did bring up a point when we were chatting over burgers at dinner, though, where you asked me, you know, are some stories furrier than others? I think knowing it, but maybe you want to...
Yeah, because one other thing, and I actually empathize with this, I kind of like this about this story, I want to say first, because I feel it's actually a bit mirrored in my own work, but I feel sometimes as if there's not as much concentration in a story on what a furry world really is. And in this sense, if you want to like, you know, just express it in the worst way, it's like using furry stand-ins for any kind of human characters you might make, and just put them in any kind of human world that might have existed.
Right. I mean, does the fact that Tori is a raccoon...
Does that bug you? Is
and
what I was curious about.
Marcel de Oppie, does the fact that he is a raccoon and a wolf, respectively, does that alter the story at all?
No, because actually the one thing I was thinking when I was reading the story was, okay, if anything could make this more uncomfortable, it would be like awkward depictions of these people's animal characteristics and how it's implicating the battle. I think I would have found that just way a bit too... like almost like technical or tedious.
No, it's an interesting question. I think it's something that anybody who is a furry author wrestles with at one point or another. Like, why am I writing furry as opposed to regular people? Or even, I suppose you could say, why am I writing furry as opposed to elves or orcs?
See, no, that's more, like, I'm not so confused about that. I don't know exactly why I'm writing about furries.
So why are you writing about furries?
I want to appeal to furries, who are, as a community themselves. It's easy to understand furries themselves and want to appeal to them, but I am curious sometimes as to why, within that spectrum, I become a bit more pushed toward the conservative, I'd say. I've been accused by non-furries, who I've been telling about, like, the furry community, of being a camp follower. And they want to say, well, all I see is, like, well, you have friends here, you have an audience for your writing, I just think you're going along with it, just have a social thing to do. And that didn't sound so inaccurate, but it just sounds like a...
Well, I mean, it sounds like they're classifying, or they're being dismissive of your participation in the community. And as if I could be an anthropologist for a moment, I kind of say that's bullshit. The fact that you are participating in the community makes you a member of it. Now, and I'd say that people participate in different ways and to different degrees.
And have different tastes.
So just because and have different tastes. So, just because you don't have a fursuit and go to every con and, commission, 20 pictures of yourself every year doesn't mean you're not a furry. I mean, maybe you don't go to any, and there are plenty of furries who don't go to any cons, measure,
just a level of involvement, even just to think of it in terms of, like, loyalty?
I think people find the involvement that works for them.
I'm a periphery.
Ha! That's good. Right. I think, honestly, people, the important thing is to find the degree of involvement that works for you, that makes sense to you, and makes you feel comfortable.
Don't you think the people more essentially involved in it are much more liable to be acting as tastemakers?
Yeah. I mean, that can be true, absolutely. But is that important to be a tastemaker?
Well, yeah, I'd say, because, okay, for one thing, if you want to... one thing you can argue this story might be beset with is an over-reliance on the established form of a kung fu narrative. As you were saying, I mean, that's just another way of reading it. And that's something that happens if you're not as involved with the construction of these norms yourself. If you're someone who's just kind of on the outside seeing what the established have done and trying to mimic them. I mean,
there's an interesting line, though, I think, and I'm not saying that this story necessarily gets there, because I don't know if it quite does, but there's an interesting line that I think you can cross if you have paid enough attention to something and studied it enough and, starting out mimicking it enough, eventually you start producing it yourself. And, so maybe we do want to look at things like, well, we've talked about Kill Bill, which I would argue crosses the line from homage into actually part of the genre. Or if we want to look at music, look at the Rolling Stones in their blues recordings, which started out in their early albums as, covers and an homage to the blues. And I'd say by the height of their period, were actually contributing to the genre as blues artists in and of themselves. And so I think you can get to that.
I think what you're arguing essentially is that furry is the gateway drug
No.
to something furrier.
No, not at all. I'm saying there's infinite variation within, and there are many paths and ways to participate. That's one of the things about it that appeals to me, the variation in what is produced and how one produces and consumes and participates.
Which do you prefer, like the more deeply like involved furry descriptions of things, or the less?
That's a good question.
Because I definitely prefer the less. I absolutely prefer the less, because I feel anytime you get too deep into it, it's getting too self-reflective and it's not really worth examining.
That's a good question, because I think it depends on the story. It's something that I personally have to take on a case-by-case basis, I feel like. If it stands out to me or feels awkward in some way or notable that this is really furry or really not, I say it's probably not working. For instance, Kim Hirasaki's story in the last episode, our little weasel friend did make this observation that, I liked his, musk. It wasn't as strong as my boyfriend's, which is sometimes overpowering. And I kind of like that as an observation, because there's always, in all these furry stories like that, the M word now seems to be, if you read So Furry, it's musk this, musk that.
Everyone likes smelly dudes.
Everyone likes smelly dudes, right. But this was an example where I liked it because it wasn't an observation of, oh, this is so great. It was an observation of, to an animal with a sensitive nose, it's too much. And I thought that was kind of because we hadn't seen that kind of observation, I felt like in a lot of furry stories. So I kind of appreciated that. And I know we've talked about before, in some books, like Kyle Gold really doesn't touch on too much in his Argia, his kind of medieval books, but in his more contemporary world books, there are references to species and laws and racism and ability in sports in ways that are interesting, and do that kind of sci-fi thing of commenting on our own attitudes and laws surrounding race. So that case, I'd say it's very skillfully deployed. But yes, there are stories where it kind of jumps out at you as something that, boy, this feels tacked on, maybe. Or it just stands out. So I think you could go either way. I think you can be, like, this is very lightly furry. Yes. Like, it wouldn't really change the story at all if Tori wasn't a raccoon.
If he were just some dude with a sword.
And, this is maybe the hardest kind of... So there is the age-old question, I think, that authors get too. So is, well, why are you writing in furry? What do you say when people ask you that?
I said earlier, because I want to appeal to the furry audience, and I like the furries. They're nice.
Yeah, you like the furry. Yeah, right, and that's nice great answer. But people are like, well, in the story, why does it have to be furries? And it's like,
I could change it.
Why doesn't it have to be furries? I think it's kind of the opposite. Or I think furries are hot. Like, that's a good answer. That's a fine answer to say, I think, raccoon guys are hot.
I don't think, like, artistically, there's not anything preventing me from translating my story just into people's and then, like, posting them on, like, human sites. Yeah. I'm just not interested.
And I think in this story there isn't either. But I think that's okay, is what I'm trying to say after this long roundabout discussion.
Yep. Hey, you know what I don't see a lot of in stories, though? Comments.
Oh. Well, see, I don't post a lot of stories.
Here's what happened. Okay, so, like, what happened, like, 2 or 3 weeks ago, FA went into file read-only mode, of course, right? So I was like, okay, so I'm just going to go read a bunch of stories, catch up on my reading, because no one's going to post any new pictures. And I would look at it, like, I'm just looking like the past month or so of stories. And every time I found a story that I liked, I would go down and I'd be the first person commenting on it. Not, like, maybe, like, they have 12, 13, 14, 15 favorites and 300, 400 views, and not a single person had said a thing about these stories yet. I always think if you read something, you should just say something about it. And I kind of feel as if that's just showing you process it and how to respond within yourself. And it's weird if it's like just to read something and have nothing to say. That's all I gotta say. It's like,
is that FA though, or I mean, I feel like I see usually some comments on So Furry.
I'm just comparing it to how people comment on pictures.
Right.
And maybe it's unfair to make that comparison, because it's a lot easier to digest a picture. But you have to imagine that if you get if you get 300 views and 2 comments, does that mean only 2 people finished your story? That's kind of disheartening.
I don't think so.
But then does that mean that, like, okay, so if you want to make a conservative estimate, how many people actually read that story?
I don't know. Well, a lot of people I don't think would bother to rate it or anything. Or...
Yeah, I'd imagine, like, I don't know, it's just very disheartening.
I think part of it is it's FA. I mean, I love FA. I check it every day. I'm not one of the FA haters. But I don't think it's a story site. I don't consider it a story site.
It's a social site. That's why I'm on it.
It's a social site and it's an art site. I mean, it's a cross between, like DeviantArt and Facebook, for furries. And, I mean, that's what it is. I don't consider it really a strong story venue at all because I think culturally and historically it isn't. So people do post stories there, of course. But that's not where people go. And I would argue, So Furry, for instance, is way more likely for people to go if they specifically want a story.
That's true, but there isn't as much of a culture for commenting on So Furry, it seems. Actually, on So Furry, you can get a larger audience, and many more views and many more favorites, but you might not get even maybe 1 or 2 more comments for it.
I think that's because it isn't a social.
Exactly. That's why I usually prefer FA, just because people are more social in general on FA, it seems. But that's only even then. It's just such a low standard for stories.
Yeah.
So can we just start encouraging people to comment on stories, please?
You can say, I'm going to let you do this as an author. Make your appeal to the audience.
No, not just as an author, just people in general. Come on, just comment on stories, everybody. And tell your friends to do it.
I confess, I don't often do it either.
Why? I always comment on a story.
Well, if I like it enough, I write them and say, can we do this on the podcast? And then we dissect it. And then we really comment on the story.
That's not. It's like once every 2 weeks at best. Come on, leave comments for people.
Okay, I should.
I mean, it's kind of selfish. Just think, okay, so maybe I shouldn't be doing this, but I was just thinking of in terms of like production and labor.
Well, it's a big motivator too, because you're not being paid for this if you post it on So Furry, and it's like, well, why am I doing this if nobody's listening?
That's always a very real
hopefully
concern.
You're doing it for yourself, but it definitely is nice to have people listen.
It's the one thing I have trouble, assuaging people with when they're coming to me for help or motivation with writing. Like if they say, "Oh, I'm just not so sure," oh, you can get better at that. You can practice. Oh, I'm not sure if I'll be able to find the time. Oh, you can always find time. But what if nobody reads it? I can't make more people read it. Yeah. I mean, there's probably a very good chance no one's gonna comment on it.
Yeah.
Like it's just the truth, yeah. And people post 1 or 2 stories. They get no comments and they stop.
The most important thing is to write it for yourself. But yeah, it's nice to have people read it. It's very nice to have people read it.
I do want to say I'm talking about publishing here. I think writing generally always should be for yourself, but I'm talking about publishing here. Right. You should be able to publish on FA and get some kind of response. If that's
I don't know if I'll do that, but I'll do it on. I really don't read on FA, but I do read on So Furry, so. I'll do that. Okay,
everybody
I'll
just throw comments at
commenting some more. You guys can hold me to that. It was one thing I did want to bring this up, and I'm not done with it yet, so I'll have to let you know more next time. But we've had our new Kindles, which we've both been enjoying. I know.
Yep.
And we get these little offers every week or two, and I think a couple weeks ago one of the offers was like over 1,000 books, only $1 each. With this coupon, you could pick one with this coupon code.
Cool.
So I did that. I was like, $1, okay. And they had some really good books, by good people, and then they had a lot of not so good looking books.
What did you get?
I ended up getting Tempting the Beast by Laura Lee.
What's this?
Well, it is a romance book. So this is, this is a porn book for women, in other words. Yeah.
Plus you.
A porn book for, plus me. Women and gay guys. And about a woman who falls in love with a lion man.
A lion man?
And these are her books, apparently. Like, she has ones that are like cat people.
Furry ex-human.
And wolf people and coyote people, and she has this whole series. So I decided, I just picked this one at random out of like the 5 of hers they had this deal for. And so I'm like I said, I'll give you the full verdict when I'm done with it. But what's there are a couple things that intrigue me so far about it. Is that here is a story of a woman who has fallen in love with a lion man, which sounds pretty furry, right?
Sounds rather furry.
Sounds very furry.
Yeah.
But, at least as far as I know, there's no indication on her website or anything, that Laura Lee is not a furry.
Oh, no.
And so it started me thinking, so what are... And this dovetails with, I think, your earlier points here about, how furry is a story. And here's a story that I would argue is inherently furry, written by somebody who isn't. And I'm saying isn't... Maybe it's the difference between being gay and being a man who has sex with other men. And that it's, you know what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
Like that it's a cultural thing. It's like, let's say I'm a guy who, every so often, has sex with my bud.
Yeah, just go out, suck a dick.
But I'm married and I don't go to pride parades, I don't go to bars, gay clubs or anything. I don't have anything to do with the lifestyle. I've never picked up an issue of Advocate in my life or whatever. Is that person gay? And I'd argue not really, because culturally, if it's a social thing, they're a man who has sex with men. They're an MSM, but they're not gay. Cool. And maybe she is a person who writes furry, or what was it, PWR or PWF.
Person who writes furry, yeah.
Right, without being a furry herself. That's interesting. And so I wonder, readers, if you want to comment in, have you read any of these stories, or do you know, do you have any experience these, and do you consider this furry writing?
Well, that's a periphery.
Even if they're not in the community, if they're not participating, if they're not in FA or going to conventions or hanging out with friends who are furries, or any of the other variety of ways that we connect with the community. That's why I'd say you're still a furry. There you go.
Sure.
Because you do connect with the community in
sort
these various
kinda.
ways.
Yep. Go out,
the other thing which blew my mind. Okay, so now we're getting into the perverted side of things. So it is a romance story, which if you haven't read romance books, and these are you go in the airport bookstore and you can pick these up. Romance novels, and you can tell because they're the torso books, as I say.
Right, yeah.
There's always a guy's rippled
Fabia
torso
books.
on the cover.
The Fabia books is what I was...
which I was joking about. I said, that's going to be my first furry novel. It's just going to be a torso on the cover. And then we're like, oh, wait a minute. Kyle Gold's Pendant of Fortune is basically a couple torsos on the cover. So there you go. Bam. But yeah, so that'll be my first, and it'll be called Torsos by Skip Rudder Tail. Just rippling with oil, which is gross and fur, let me
I just think it's great that wherever you go, you find the regional variants on these things. When I was back in Amish country, I saw Amish romance novels, the girl who's out on Rumspringa, or the outsider who's trying to gain admittance. And so,
or I always love that Family Guy bit, where the 1920s porn, and she's like, "Oh, look at her vote, that dirty girl." Oh yeah. Yeah. So, there's lots of sex in this book so far, about halfway through, and they've had sex several times, her and this lion guy. Here's the part that is freaking me out, though. He has a barb.
Really?
A barb. Singular.
Singular?
Singular barb, because he is a lion guy.
Oh.
Because, you've read the stories with, cat guys, and, the barbs, and they really scrape me, and you're like, ow. But anyway,
right.
Unless you're into that. But, yeah, he has a single barb.
Oh,
and I want to go to her. I'm like, how did you...
come to, that agreement?
Wow. This is her, and just trying to picture it in my head. I want to, commission a drawing from somebody, go to Blotch and be like, okay, draw me a lion guy with a barb. And I think it's, right where the frenulum is. That's kind of how I'm picturing it, but I could be wrong. But she's always, being,
that's just how it fantasizes in your head.
Her itch scratched by this barb, and she's like, what is that?
Why are you reading this?
Because it's... Oh, it's girl
it's just
sex. I apologize to it. Says there's sex with a woman in there. I didn't mean to freak you out. I did not mean to, talk about things in a vagina. I apologize.
That's not what I'm saying. Yeah. You can't use your sociological interest in just things to very like give yourself license to read about gross barbs.
I don't know. Can't I?
No, I'm
Why not?
saying you can't.
Why the hell not?
Because it sounds awful.
It does. It does sound awful. So yes,
Why do you
anybody,
continue?
if you have a idea of how the MONOBARB works, send your pictures to Skip at baddogbook.com.
You can not send that.
The winning prize. The winning prize.
What is wrong with you? Oh my word!
The winning prize will be a 1,000-word story about you by Toonses. There you go.
No way. This is why
1,000 words.
No, see,
it doesn't even have to feature the MONOBARB in it. I'm willing to do that for you.
This is where I call my ride and go home from the party.
We're at your house.
I'm speaking metaphorically. You know?
So yeah, there you go. If you have an idea of how the MONOBARB works, send your entries to.
I don't want to hear
baddogbookclub.com.
See, no, because my characters always have like human dongers. Cause
yeah,
that's okay. It's cool.
We talked about that before.
I don't know. People ask for like knots and stuff. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll write a knot for you, whatever.
Yeah, knots are kind of okay. There was a good story in So Furry kind of talking about that a little bit, like knots, and he doesn't like having a knot because it's inconvenient. And it was one of those moments where it was like it's kind of neat to see that in a story because we don't normally. So anyway. Yes.
It was a good story, really. Could have been better, but I liked it.
Yeah, I think, like I said, it was, I liked a lot of the things it was doing. The only thing I would have said is have a little more connection between the characters, a little more reason, but the story worked for me. So...
Just flesh it out a little bit. It reads a little bit like a first draft or something.
And you can... And if you did like the story... you can buy it and the other stories in the collection, Tales from the Fur Side, which is available from our friends at Rabbit Valley.
Sure, buy books.
We always say if you haven't published
and not just
yet,
commenting, but like buy books. Like just buy. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Support. Is what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
It's like everything you want to do is going to help people.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, rabbitvalley.com.
Encourage people to write.
And it's Tales from the Fur Side by Vixyy Fox, and I guess each story is paired with a illustration by Dark Natasha.
That's another reason to buy.
There you go. Good stuff.
Biography.
Yes. So and anything else you want to add? Oh, I do have to admit my failure this week.
What happened?
Well, I said we'd give a little 5-10 minute review of Bridges, and I lost track of time and did not get it finished last night like I wanted to. Right. So we'll do that next time. And I apologize because Toonses here was like so ready to do it, and I was not. So that's my bad, folks. We'll do that next time. And I think Toonses he has a story for us next week, which you're going to read yourself, right?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
May as well.
Cool.
From, I don't know, it goes by Scandal Waiting to Happen on FA or something like that.
All right, well, we look forward to hearing it. So, anyway, anything else to add?
I'd say that's it. I have a Penn State joke.
Oh, God.
But it's really not, you can't really set up as a joke. It's just been, like, a mean thing people have been saying, which is that Penn State has this unfair competitive advantage because they can start their recruiting at age 11.
Send complaints to.
I just wanted to pass that along.
Toonses at baddogbook.com.
No. Okay, it's not even that offensive, but I just want to pass this along to register. This is the moment that I became absolutely disgusted with. It's just weird because
he's from near State College.
State College is more or less where I'm from. This is and I knew somebody who knew somebody personally. Like it's one of these weird things where you know somebody who knows somebody who was involved personally. Crazy.
Terrible.
So I'm gonna start making fun of Penn State. Like this is the firing gun.
Toonses has to find a new college team to root for.
This is the starting pistol on me making fun of Penn State for the rest of my natural existence.
There you go.
Is what I'm saying.
There you go. Mm-hmm. Well, and hopefully you'll be back in town.
Yep.
Next episode.
Yep.
So hopefully he'll be moving back officially, returning to DC.
Yep.
So I'm excited about that because I miss having him around.
Yep.
And I was glad you're able to do today here.
Thanks, Skip. Had a good time.
Yeah, good. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for that, and we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Bye, everybody. Ciao. Peace.